For over a decade, Catherine remained tight-lipped about the woman whose legacy loomed over the monarchy like a ghost in every hallway, Princess Diana. But the silence wasn't apathy, it was a shield. And now, for the first time, the Duchess breaks it with a confession that shook the royal walls and left her own family in tears. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. From the moment Catherine stepped into royal life, the comparisons were relentless. The press dubbed her the new Diana before she had even adjusted to life behind palace gates. Every glance, every outfit, every maternal gesture scrutinized under the lens of a legacy that had never been fully laid to rest. And yet, for years she held her tongue. Not once did she publicly utter Diana's name, even when journalists baited her with questions laced in emotion. Behind that poised smile was a woman wrestling with the haunting weight of a legend, one she had never met, but felt bound to every single day. Insiders have long whispered that Catherine was discouraged from invoking Diana's memory too frequently. The institution, still healing from decades of scandal and heartbreak, wanted stability, not sentiment. Emotional statements, particularly about Diana, were viewed as risky, perhaps even incendiary. So Catherine played the part graceful, composed, silent. But in private, something very different was happening. According to a former palace aide, Catherine began keeping a journal in her early royal years. Tucked away inside were unsent letters, each one written to the woman she was never allowed to mourn publicly. The letters weren't polished or political, they were raw, honest. Some filled with questions she felt no one else could answer. Others simply bore lines of exhaustion and quiet cries for guidance. "I'm trying to be strong like you," one reads, "but some days I feel like I'm pretending." She'd never intended for anyone to see them, not even William. And yet, the act of writing was her rebellion, a way to connect with the one woman who could understand what it meant to be adored, isolated, and silently judged by the world. The strain of this comparison was more than emotional. Friends say Catherine often questioned whether she was being loved for who she truly was, or simply as Diana's echo. She feared her identity was being erased before it could even take shape. Despite her efforts to remain grounded for her children, the burden of expectations grew heavier with time. It was only after a quiet conversation with Princess Anne during a private family retreat that something shifted. Anne, known for her blunt honesty, allegedly told Catherine, "The world thinks they know Diana, but they don't know you. Maybe it's time they should." That moment lit a spark. Days later, palace staff noticed something unusual. Catherine made an unscheduled stop at the royal archives and requested access to Diana's personal notes. It was then that she added a final entry to her unsent letters, a message not just for Diana, but for the entire nation. The Duchess had decided to break her silence, and the world would never see her the same again. But what Catherine revealed next didn't just honor Diana, it exposed royal truths hidden for decades. Kept under lock and key for years, Catherine's handwritten letter to Diana was never meant for public eyes. But recent royal tensions and a growing need to protect her children drove her to reveal the one thing she thought she'd keep buried forever. And once you hear what she wrote, you won't forget it. The letter had been written years ago, tucked away inside a sealed envelope, marked only with one word, her. Buried deep within the private vaults of the palace, few even knew it existed, fewer still dared to ask about its contents. But the walls of secrecy began to tremble when Catherine, burdened by a storm of pressures and betrayals, made the decision to retrieve what she had once sworn to keep hidden. Insiders say it wasn't a public gesture, but a deeply personal act. A royal aide with knowledge of the moment claims Catherine opened the envelope with trembling hands and whispered, "It's time." What followed was the unsealing of not just paper, but of years of grief, longing and strength forged in silence. Within the pages, Catherine poured out more than emotion, she poured out survival. The words weren't polished or performative. They bled truth. "I tried to be strong like you," one devastating line read, "but I felt alone." William, upon hearing those words for the first time, reportedly turned away, his shoulders shaking not from surprise but recognition. He had seen the toll royal life had taken on his wife, the same toll it had taken on his mother. The world had drawn parallels between Diana and Catherine for years, but no one had stopped to ask what it felt like to live as someone else's echo. The letter was full of paradoxes, admiration and agony, courage and fragility. Catherine admitted she sometimes resented the impossible standard Diana left behind, the constant whisper of comparison in every headline and photograph. "They don't see me," she wrote. "They only look for you." And yet, in the same breath, she thanked Diana for showing her what it meant to endure with grace, to wear heartbreak like armor, to cry behind the veil and still wave with poise. It was not the fame, the fashion, or the legacy Catherine envied. It was the strength in vulnerability that Diana had quietly mastered, and the peace she never got to enjoy. In one of the most striking turns, Catherine described what it felt like to be expected to mirror a ghost, to be told without words to replicate a woman she never knew. "I walk the same corridors, smile at the same cameras, love the same man, but I am not you, and still they ask me to be." That confession was no. A cry for sympathy. It was a declaration of identity, and it was this emotional reckoning that moved Catherine to finally share the letter not with the world, but with someone she trusted without condition. That person was Princess Anne. In a private exchange behind closed doors, Catherine handed the letter to Anne with quiet resolve. There were no palace advisors, no cameras, no press, just two women bound by duty, bound by pain, and now bound by truth. Anne, whose own silence has often been mistaken for coldness, reportedly read the letter without blinking, closed it slowly, and placed her hand Catherine's. No words were spoken, but something shifted, a bond, an alliance, and an unspoken understanding that what Catherine had written could no longer be ignored. But the letter was only the beginning, because the words behind closed doors were far more explosive than ink could ever convey. In a midnight conversation overheard by a trusted aide, Catherine and William shared words that haven't left the palace since. She confessed a truth about Diana that William had never heard. And in that moment, Catherine's role in the monarchy shifted forever. The stillness of the late hour couldn't quiet the storm that had been brewing behind palace doors. In the confines of their private quarters, William paced, his brow furrowed, while Catherine sat rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The weight of her decision hung between them, too heavy to ignore, too powerful to delay. William, ever the strategist, urged caution. Going public with anything tied to Diana would unleash forces they couldn't control. "It's not just about you anymore," he warned. But Catherine's eyes held something he hadn't seen before, not defiance, but clarity, and what she said next stopped him cold. "I'm not doing this for attention," she whispered. "I'm doing this because your mother gave me the courage to stay, not run." Those words hit like thunder. For a moment, William couldn't speak. He had watched his wife navigate years of scrutiny, stoicism and sacrifice, never once imagining that Diana's presence, though long gone, had become her source of strength. Catherine revealed that during her lowest moments, when pressure eclipsed purpose and her voice was silenced by expectation, she would return to Diana's speeches, her interviews, her letters, and in them she found something no protocol could teach humanity: resilience, truth. But this wasn't just about Catherine anymore. William confessed something he had never openly admitted, not even to himself. "Sometimes," he said, "I feel like they've turned her memory into a symbol to control us. A shield when they want pity, a sword when they want silence." It was an admission that peeled back the polished veneer of royal unity and exposed the fractures beneath. The memory of Diana, once sacred, had become a battlefield. Her name evoked not for love, but leverage, and Catherine was done watching in silence. They didn't come to a Duchess. Ion that night, they made a pact to no longer allow Diana's legacy to be weaponized against truth. William, once hesitant, looked his wife in the eyes and gave a quiet nod. If Catherine was going to speak, she would speak with his full backing. But it had to be on their terms, in their time. No media intermediaries, no palace interference, just truth raw and unfiltered. As the conversation neared its end, Catherine spoke the words that would define everything that followed. "Diana's shadow will speak through me now." It wasn't a threat, it was a vow. Not to mimic, but to continue what Diana began to shine light in dark corners, to speak when silence served no one, and to lead not with fear, but with feeling. That midnight exchange, once overheard and dismissed as mere marital discussion, would soon echo through the highest halls of power. Because what came next wasn't a quiet rebellion, it was a confrontation with history itself. And speak she did first to the advisers, then in a confidential summit that would stun even the most hardened royal insiders. Royal insiders reveal that when Catherine's emotional letter was shown to Queen Camilla and King Charles, the reaction wasn't empathy, it was fear. Fear that Catherine was now carrying Diana's fire into a monarchy, still struggling to recover from it. The moment the letter reached the hands of the king, the air in the room reportedly changed. Silence fell like a curtain. Charles read each line slowly, his expression unmoving but his knuckles white against the paper. Those closest to him say he didn't speak for nearly 20 minutes, but when he did, it wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't dismiss the letter, he didn't praise it either. He simply whispered, "She's found her voice," and left the room without another word. Behind him, a storm began to gather because Catherine's words had reached more than just the monarch. They had reached the Queen. Camilla's response was swift and unapologetic. In a heated meeting, her closest confidants, she reportedly lashed out, "She's weaponizing sentiment. This isn't tribute, it's a takeover." To Camilla, this wasn't about grief or healing. It was about control. And the thought of Diana's legacy being resurrected by Catherine of all people was a threat she wasn't willing to ignore. Palace aides described the Queen's fury as unprecedented. Meetings were called, messages circulated. Courtiers scrambled to craft a narrative that would downplay the letter's emotional impact. But it was already too late. The public was responding, and within the palace, loyalties were beginning to fracture. Not everyone viewed Catherine's letter as insubordination. Princess Anne, known for her guarded loyalty to tradition, shocked many by quietly voicing her support. She reportedly told one aide, "We can't keep silencing truth just because it's inconvenient." Her words carried weight and caused ripples among the senior royals. For the first time in years, the palace was divided. Some saw Catherine's move as reckless, dangerous. Others saw it as necessary, as a reckoning long overdue. The divide was no longer just personal, it was institutional. Behind the scenes, damage control became priority one. Camilla allegedly summoned her senior courtiers to issue firm guidelines on how staff should respond to media inquiries. The press office was instructed to avoid commenting directly. Instead, they were to redirect focus to upcoming charitable initiatives. But the distraction tactic failed, because while headlines tried to pivot, the public only leaned in further. The letter had reignited questions the palace had worked decades to bury. And Catherine? She stayed silent but made one decision that sent a thunderclap through every corridor of power. She refused to withdraw the letter from public record. Her refusal was quiet, measured, but immovable. She made it known that the letter would stand, that it would not be edited, retracted, or buried. It was a message not just to the palace, but to the public. She was done playing the part. Catherine had stepped into the space between silence and rebellion, and the monarchy, unprepared for the fire she carried, was now being forced to confront a legacy it had long tried to contain. But this wasn't just about memory or emotion. Catherine was building towards something no one expected, a public address that would revive Diana's voice in the most powerful way possible. It was supposed to be a simple charity speech. But insiders now confirm Catherine rewrote her address at the last minute, and what she delivered was a thunderous message about love, legacy, and loyalty. The palace tried to stop it, but it was already too late. The event was scheduled as part of Catherine's ongoing work with mental health charities, a cause close to her heart, but also one Diana had passionately championed decades earlier. The chosen venue was no accident, the very same organization where Diana had once knelt beside the broken, forgotten, and the voiceless. The palace had cleared a sanitized version of the speech safe, distant, ceremonial. But just hours before she took the stage, Catherine made a decision that would send tremors through the monarchy. With a stroke of her pen, she rewrote everything. What she stood and delivered wasn't protocol, it was a proclamation. The woman who came before me still teaches me how to survive. That single line silenced the room and ignited something far beyond its walls. It wasn't simply a tribute, it was a declaration. A subtle, unflinching reminder that Diana's spirit had not been erased, it had been reborn. Catherine spoke not as a royal puppet, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman who had learned to navigate the same brutal maze Diana once walked. She didn't need to name the media or the monarchy, her pointed phrasing made it clear. The invasion of privacy, the emotional suppression, the performative smiles, they were all still alive. And so was the pain they caused. E spoke with clarity and conviction, but beneath it was sorrow, not just for herself, but for the woman who never got the chance to finish her own story. Catherine's voice trembled just once when she mentioned how Diana's strength had taught her how to build her own. It was an admission that behind the polished image was a woman who had, at times, nearly broken. And yet, she had endured. Because Diana had shown her how. When she finished speaking, there was no polite applause, there was silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the audience rose to their feet. Many in tears. The standing ovation lasted over 2 minutes. Cameras captured it. The internet exploded. Global headlines called it a Diana-level shockwave. But inside the palace it was panic. Senior aides, completely blindsided, reportedly scrambled to do damage control. Some even considered the speech a betrayal of royal restraint. It was rumoured that Charles, though outwardly calm, was furious, and privately questioned whether Catherine should be pulled from public-facing roles moving forward. But the damage was already done. Or, as some would say, the healing had finally begun. Because what Catherine did on that stage wasn't just speak, she reignited a voice the monarchy had tried for years to control. Diana's legacy had been handed down not through blood, but through courage. And Catherine had claimed it in full view of the world. But the impact was irreversible, and one particular royal, once silent herself, came forward to stand by Catherine. Princess Anne has rarely involved herself in palace drama, but in a moment of rare emotion, she made a declaration that stunned the monarchy. I stood with Diana. I'll stand with Catherine. With those words, the royal fault lines cracked open further. In the wake of Catherine's explosive speech, as the palace reeled and headlines continued to roar across continents, a car quietly arrived at Balmoral. No cameras, no press, only the unmistakable figure of Princess Anne step. Ping out, unaccompanied. Her arrival wasn't announced, nor was it planned, but insiders confirm she had only one request time alone with Catherine. What happened behind those doors is still cloaked in confidentiality, but what emerged from it would become one of the most defining moments in royal history. Anne, the ever-disciplined royal soldier, broke her own protocol. She placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder and said, not with flourish but with resolve, "You did what no one else dared." Diana would be proud. Their conversation wasn't long, but it was layered. Anne shared something Catherine had never heard before, a story buried in the past, whispered in corridors but never officially spoken. In the early 1990s, Anne and Diana had formed a quiet, strategic alliance. Though often painted by tabloids as distant or cold, Anne had warned Diana once, "They will love your smile and fear your strength." The two had met privately, rarely, but with purpose. Anne had respected Diana's resilience, even if they were rarely seen side by side. And now she saw that same unbending will in Catherine. To Anne, it wasn't history repeating, it was history evolving. Anne made her stance known beyond those walls. She contacted Charles directly, breaking her usual avoidance of sensitive political family matters. Her message was sharp and clear. She's not your threat, she's your shield. It wasn't an endorsement of rebellion. It was a recognition of survival. Anne understood something others were too blinded by fear to see. Catherine wasn't trying to dismantle the monarchy, she was fighting to humanize it, and in doing so, she was protecting the very future the institution claimed to care about. But the declaration didn't bring harmony. It brought conflict. Anne's support for Catherine sent a ripple effect through Charles and Camilla's inner circle. Senior aides were divided, whispers turned into strategic planning, and the mood within the palace became more fractured than it had been in decades. Camilla, already rattled by Catherine's rising emotional influence, saw Anne's move not as solidarity but betrayal. Tensions escalated behind closed doors. Allegiances were questioned. Rumours of late-night meetings, heated calls, and threats to restrict Catherine's engagements began to leak. Still, Catherine didn't flinch, with Anne quietly behind her and William standing firm. At her side, she understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about Diana anymore. It was about truth, legacy, and power. And the more the institution tried to silence her, the louder the echoes of Diana became. But even as support grew, so did the resistance, and one royal figure in particular emerged as the fiercest opponent of Catherine's rising emotional influence. While the public celebrated Catherine's courage, Queen Camilla was seething behind palace walls. To her, this wasn't an act of homage, it was an act of rebellion, and according to insiders, Camilla's private conversations revealed a fear that could upend the balance of power. In the aftermath of Catherine's bold speech and Princess Anne's stunning declaration of support, Queen Camilla found herself in a position she had long fought to avoid being overshadowed. For years, she had worked to reshape public perception, to redefine her role within the royal machine. And just when it seemed the dust of Diana's shadow had finally settled, Catherine shattered the silence and brought that legacy roaring back to life. Behind closed doors, Camilla didn't hide her fury. "She's invoking ghosts to seize hearts," she told Charles in a tense exchange overheard by palace staff. Her voice was sharp, her tone unwavering. To her, Catherine's rising emotional influence wasn't innocent, it was a threat. But Charles, burdened by his own guilt and fatigue, offered no clear directive. He remained caught in the crossfire between his wife's growing unease and his son's unwavering loyalty to Catherine. That silence only fueled Camilla's determination. She began pushing for new restrictions on Catherine's public appearances, urging advisers to tighten the reins, as one insider put it. Proposals circulated: public speaking protocols, wardrobe consultations, messaging guidelines, all framed as protective measures. But those close to the situation say the intent was clear: suppress Catherine's reach before it became uncontainable. Meanwhile, tensions behind the scenes were boiling. Camilla's relationship with William, already strained, was reaching a breaking point. According to reports, their interactions grew cold and clipped. William, fiercely protective of his wife, saw the moves as not just political, but personal. Camilla, on the other hand, believed she was preserving the monarchy's integrity. What unfolded next wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a war between two visions of royalty, one rooted in stoic tradition, the other in emotional truth. The institutional monarchy versus the emotional monarchy. And the palace was being forced to choose. Even senior staff weren't immune to the fallout. Reports of hushed arguments between Camilla and Anne emerged, with one insider claiming Anne confronted the Queen directly. "You're fighting ghosts instead of listening to the living." The room reportedly went silent. No one had spoken to Camilla like that in years. But Anne, always unshakable, refused to stand down. Camilla, in response, doubled down on her efforts to isolate Catherine's influence. Yet, despite the chaos and confrontation swirling around her, Catherine remained composed. She issued no statements, gave no interviews, and entertained no palace games. When privately questioned about the rising backlash, she offered only one quiet line: "This isn't about me, it's about healing." Those words, simple and resolute, left some stunned and others defiant. But they made one thing clear: Catherine wasn't backing down. She wasn't seeking a throne or a spotlight. She was reclaiming something deeper, the right to speak truth, even when it trembled through centuries of silence. But as the palace boiled behind closed doors, one figure remained hauntingly silent until Catherine said the one thing no one expected her to say. After years of silence, Catherine uttered Diana's name in an emotional interview and broke down mid-sentence. What followed was an outpouring of honesty, pain, and admiratio. It brought a nation to tears and forced even the coldest royal skeptics to pause. It was never meant to be that kind of interview. Slated as a reflection on Catherine's mental health initiatives, it quickly became something far more raw, more human. Seated in front of millions, she answered questions with her usual grace, composed but sincere. But as the conversation turned toward the subject of influence of legacy, the air changed. The interviewer gently asked if Diana had shaped her journey. There was a pause, a deep breath, and then, like a crack in a dam that had long held back a flood, Catherine finally spoke the name she had carried silently for so long. "I wish I'd known her. I wish she'd seen me as a mother." Her voice trembled, and then it broke. Tears welled up, not dramatic, not performative, but the kind of tears that come from years of suppressed emotion finally finding the light. The silence in the studio was absolute. Even the camera operators stood frozen. Catherine D. didn't apologize for crying. She didn't try to regain control. She let it happen. In that moment, she became more than a future queen. She became a daughter-in-law grieving the relationship she never had. A woman who had carried the burden of another woman's legend, while quietly trying to build her own path beneath it. When she collected herself and continued, her words pierced through layers of royal restraint. She spoke of how Diana's vulnerability had made strength seem possible, of how her courage in the face of cruelty became Catherine's private compass through the darkest days of her royal life. The response was immediate. Across the country and beyond, it felt as though something had finally shifted. Social media erupted in a storm of empathy, with the phrase #ForDiana&Kate trending globally. Viewers flooded online forums and news comment sections with messages of support. For once, even the press softened. Headlines didn't sensationalize her tears, they honored them. Major publications referred to her as Diana's emotional heir, not in a shallow comparison, but as a rightful continuation of a legacy built on heartache and resilience. But perhaps the most powerful moment came off camera. As the interview ended and the lights began to dim, William stepped forward from behind the scenes. He didn't say much, just leaned in and whispered, "Thank you." It was a thank you not just for her strength, but for speaking the words he himself had never dared say aloud. In Catherine's pain he saw his mother, and for the first time in years the silence surrounding Diana's memory didn't feel suffocating. It felt sacred. The nation rallied, not just around Catherine, but around the idea that the monarchy didn't have to be cold to be strong, that maybe, just maybe, Diana's legacy hadn't died. It had been waiting for the right voice, the right moment. And Catherine, by finally breaking her silence, had answered that call in full. And just when the storm seemed to settle, the palace revealed something Catherine never expected, their final gesture that brought Diana's presence full circle. In a rare moment of unity, the monarchy unveiled a tribute that silenced every critic, a royal decree connecting Diana's legacy to Catherine's future. But it wasn't just symbolic, it marked a turning point in how the crown would be seen for generations. After months of tension, outcry, and emotional revelation, few expected what came next. In a tightly guarded ceremony at Windsor, the royal family unveiled a portrait unlike any seen before. Hung in one of the most historically revered halls, the image showed two women, Diana and Catherine, side by side, their expressions soft but resolute. It wasn't an artistic pairing born from fantasy. It was a statement. Commissioned in secret and approved by King Charles himself, the portrait was designed to end the war of whispers and acknowledge a truth the palace had avoided. Diana had never truly left. And Catherine wasn't a successor, she was a continuation. But the gesture didn't stop at oil and canvas. A formal royal decree followed just hours later. In it, Catherine was bestowed a title not of rank, but of meaning, protector of legacy and future. The phrase was unprecedented in royal history, crafted not to elevate status, but to crystallize purpose. Charles, in an uncharacteristic moment of vulnerability, stood before the gathered members of the house and publicly praised his daughter-in-law's resilience. He admitted that for too long, grief had been mismanaged behind palace gates. That Diana's voice, though silenced by tragedy, had echoed in the choices Catherine had made for the family's future. The public reaction was immediate and emotional. Crowds gathered outside Kensington and Buckingham, leaving flowers, handwritten letters, and glowing lanterns lit in Diana's memory. Candlelight vigils sprang up across the country, with images of the portrait projected onto historic buildings. It was as if the nation was finally exhaling, finally healing. And at the centre of it all stood Catherine, calm, poised, and deeply moved. She stepped forward to deliver one final statement, not to the press, not to the institution, but to the people. She paved the path, Catherine said through tears, and I'm walking it now. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't orchestrated, it was real, and for once the crown didn't feel distant, it felt human. Later that night, away from the flashbulbs and formality, Catherine returned home. She gathered her children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and stood with them beneath the framed portrait recently hung in their private sitting room. She bent low and whispered, "This was for Grandma." Her children may never fully understand the war their mother had quietly fought, but in that moment they saw the grace she had inherited. Not through blood, but through courage, through pain, through truth. And as the image of Diana fades into history, one thing becomes clear: her voice didn't vanish. It simply waited, until Catherine was ready to speak. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.